Joining me today are Craig Hughson and Jacqueline Biollo, two principals at Aurora Strategy Global who are part of our Indigenous practice team. Today we're going to talk about the recent Supreme Court appointment by Prime Minister Trudeau of Supreme Court nominee Michelle Obasuen, who is going to be Canada's first Indigenous justice on the Supreme Court. She'll be replacing Justice Moldaver, who is retiring after serving more than a decade on the highest court, and she'll be dealing in a number of issues, including Indigenous, employment, mental health, and a number of other areas that she brings her expertise in. So welcome to the podcast, Jacqueline and Craig. And we'll start with you, Jacqueline. What do you think of this appointment by Prime Minister Trudeau?
I'm sitting on Territory 6 and wish to acknowledge the different, not only treaties and the reserves and the different Indigenous peoples that are within my territory. So first and foremost to that. Second, I think it's always exciting and important that we move forward with initiatives. I mean, the Government of Canada has certainly made the Truth and Reconciliation an important discussion within Parliament. As well, we've heard for many years that representation of women in all different areas of either employment or opportunity. So at a very high level, I think this is exciting. It's a good choice. And I look forward to just fleshing it out a little bit more as we carry on this conversation.
And Craig, what's your thoughts on this appointment?
It's about time, isn't it? The Indigenous population makes up 5% of Canada's population, and this is finally our first Supreme Court nominee or appointment, and we hopefully see more diversity on the Supreme Court. Good. Kudos to the Prime Minister. Kudos to Michelle Obasuen for her impressive resume, and let's get on with it.
So how do you think this is really going to impact the court? There's a number of issues that are going to be coming up before the Supreme Court that involve Indigenous issues, certainly things coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in terms of how land claims are being dealt with. There's issues in terms of water in a number of reserves, housing, etc. How will she impact the Supreme Court in terms of how she deals with those types of issues? Jacqueline?
Yeah, well, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because even in preparation for this conversation, I did look back at some of the progression that has been made on some of the appointments. And some of those have been because the individuals have a particular area of interest, whether it's been civil litigation or civil law, whether it's been regulatory, etc. And so not only as the Canadian government continues to evolve, so do Canadians. And with this appointment, it really is an opportunity for us to continue to learn and to appreciate, to recognize, and to make some positive changes or to see innovation happen that will certainly impact the present, but also the future. So, specifically, of course, we have all of those recommendations that will branch out from the Truth and Reconciliation reports. But the most important right now for me is that because there is a positive light on this appointment and the opportunity to continue the conversation about Indigenous relations, that's what's exciting about this opportunity.
So Craig, we recently had the retirement of Justice Rosalie Abella, who is seen as one of the progressive voices on the Supreme Court. And now we're seeing that Justice Obasuen is not replacing her specifically, but replacing Justice Moldaver. But do you see her picking up the mantle of Abella in terms of being that progressive social voice on the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. She comes from a working class family growing up just outside of Sudbury labor background and mom and dad, and I think she's got the world vision, and what she's lived, her lived experience in life will put her very much on that team to bring social values and a left-wing look at everything she puts forward. Obviously, her Indigenous heritage aside, she has that viewpoint. So I think she's going to be great.
Now, some people in the legal profession have mildly criticized the Prime Minister for this appointment because they feel that she doesn't have the same heft and experience that Justice Moldover had. And so they think that she's not going to be able to deliver the types of decisions that Moldover provided during his tenure on the Supreme Court. It's not, they're not specifically criticizing her or the fact that she's Indigenous. It's that she doesn't have the experience that someone like Moldover or Abella had before they were appointed to the Supreme Court. She's relatively young for a Supreme Court justice, so there's that element as well. What are your thoughts, Craig? And then I'll ask Jacqueline for hers.
Yeah, she's 48 years old. That gives her potentially 3 decades on the Supreme Court if she sticks around till forced retirement at 75. So yeah, I can understand that the people long in the tooth in the legal profession are going to say there are more experienced people that could have taken this role, and hey, they may be right, but it is time to add some diversity and different lived experiences to the Supreme Court. It's not never just one person making a decision. There are 9 of them on the Supreme Court, and diversity is their strength as well. And so let's allow some different experiences. It's not like we're putting lay people on the Supreme Court. She is a quality candidate. She held herself exceptionally well in the on Parliament Hill yesterday, and I think to those that might make a little bit of noise on this, there could be some grapes, and they figured they should have been there, but this is great. Let's see more of this, and yeah.
And Jacqueline, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to say that don't we all learn to walk before we run? And so there has been in the past even talks about mentorship and certainly that building the opportunity for the next generation. So learning through an opportunity, we absolutely know that she's qualified with that respectability of the law. And I also have seen her speak eloquently about, her focus is on the legal issues, the regulatory bodies, rather than primarily on her Indigenous background. So what we're going to see from this more youthful individual is a positive, perhaps different perspective. But there's so many opportunities either to continue to learn from the various cases and protocol that will be presented to her. But as well, what a great opportunity for those to continue to mentor her who have more experience. So, I am certainly more of the positive optimist, looking at giving, up-and-comers or newer, the younger generation, that opportunity. At some point, they will be the leaders as well, and she'll be the veteran that will be mentoring somebody else in the future. So
just picking up on what you just said, how do you think her appointment is going to play out in terms of other Indigenous lawyers, possibly young people in the Indigenous communities seeking to get involved in the legal profession, and some who are already in it might want to step up into being part of the justice system as a judge and moving through the ranks. How do you see that playing out?
Indigenous culture, Indigenous people have not had the same opportunity, perhaps, to excel, to explore job opportunities, education, to be innovative, to have that self-confidence. And don't we all know that if we have someone that we can look to, not that we need to emulate or that we want to be, but we're inspired by. Now, it's not a standalone issue. Certainly the government needs to address whether it's financial aid or all of those sustainability initiatives, breaking down the barriers that perhaps have been identified before for Indigenous people. So there is a lot, but you've got to start somewhere. And if this is some positive place to start, then I think it bodes well for all Canadians and Indigenous people.
Now, I'm going to change the topic slightly and talk about the recent visit by His Holiness the Pope to Canada and the question about his apology, that he made in Edmonton and then repeated in Quebec City and Nunavut. So we had the Pope visit. Now we've had a Supreme Court justice appointment. How do you think this is all going to play out in terms of reconciliation? Is this showing that there are signs on the part of the Canadian government, on part of Canadians, to make amends for any past issues that were identified in the report and trying to bring the Indigenous community more into the Canadian mainstream? Craig, your thoughts on this?
These are all great baby steps on a very long journey that I think we Canadians and global citizens all have to embark upon. It'll be a month or two from now, and we will no longer be talking about this exciting news of the Supreme Court justice being Indigenous, talking about Indigenous women in space, and all of this stuff is opportunity and hope for Indigenous youth to see themselves in doing these roles that they traditionally haven't been able to see themselves. So all of these steps and progress we can make as Canadians is good news.
Thank you, Craig. And Jacqueline, just on the same topic, but I'll also note that the Canadian government recently settled a decades-old water issue with one of the Northern Ontario bands, and something that's taken years of litigation, and they finally have settled. So, are we really making the steps necessary to recognize the legitimate claims that Indigenous communities have and to be able to address them?
Well, Marcel, I think that there are so many issues. So if I could start back with the apology, the Pope here visited Alberta, and certainly the comments were vast. Some people very much appreciated the opportunity just to know that an effort was made. Others found their own understanding and appreciation in the words of the apology. But there's always going to be those that either think that it was a political or, a religious sort of tokenism. There are others that think that enough is enough, whereas in the same, is it enough? So the conversation right now, I think, is important to continue to be had, to remain open-minded to appreciating that everybody will feel their own sense of understanding, appreciation, acceptance, reconciliation of the matter. And then finally, what and how will we continue to educate, and inform or resolve these matters moving forward. So specifically now pivoting to the water issue, it's a human right, in my opinion, and we should be doing everything that we can to assist, all situations where, and it's not just clean drinking water or access to water. There are many other initiatives where the government or individuals, corporations, if they can help as well to be innovative and leaders in these different components to make it a better and more feasible living environment for all Canadians.
On that note, I'd like to thank Jacqueline, who's in Edmonton, Alberta, and Craig, who's in Toronto, for joining me today on the podcast. Appreciate both of your comments, and I look forward to having further discussions about this and other related issues. So thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you, Craig. Joining me is Annette Borger, is a professor at Humber College, where she teaches the graduate program in public relations in the Faculty of Media and Creative Arts. Thank you for joining us, Annette. You're here in Toronto, and we're going to talk about something that people have been talking about for the last week, maybe even 2 weeks, and that is the recent sacking of Lisa LaFlamme from CTV's national news program. And the fallout continues to generate a lot of news and commentary. Just this week, we saw Wendy's put out a social media where they changed the iconic Wendy logo and had her in gray. And then we had Dove Soap put out another social media on loving people regardless of what age and what hair style they have. So we're seeing now private sector companies using this incident as a way of branding and keeping this issue alive in people's minds.
Yeah, it has been, I think now it's 2 weeks of outrage on the social, and every day there's something new that's coming through. And yes, Wendy's, Dove, Sports Illustrated, this story has also gone around the world in outlets. It is a topic of great discussion. And I'm absolutely gutted. When the news came out last week of Lisa, who is at the top of her game, just one of the most quintessential professionals, a leader, an award winner, heading up sort of, a national broadcast, number one in their spot. To have this happen, you have to take pause and go, what's up? Like, this is just not right. And for me, when I reflect on it, it was the absolute lack of humanity, that there was a callousness that came across, that there was, an insensitivity. And, we're all professionals, we can all believe that, these things happen, but these things don't happen in this way. And so it's been interesting to see all the fallout, and rightly so. The one, thing that is taking place is this conversation about ageism. And something that women of a certain age, me being one of them, have come to, sort of acknowledge.
No, I 100% agree. And, I'm trying to recall, two iconic newscasters, Mansbridge and Robertson. They were working well into their 70s and later, and they were given a hero's send-off. And then what happened to Lisa was just, completely, she was actually told back at the end of June that she was not being rehired, or her contract was not being renewed. And then it only came out in the last 2 weeks in August. So there was about a 6-week gap between when she was told and when she went on Twitter with a video talking about how she was gutted of finding out this information.
Yeah, I mean, and it was a powerful video, and it was, but delivered as you'd expect with the professionalism that she is known for. Mm-hmm. And, you know, to say that she was blindsided, to admit, you know, what had happened was incredibly, you know, sort of was brave and was also authentic. And I think that's why Canadians, you know, have come to, you know, enjoy her broadcast, follow her. It's the authenticity. It's the trust that she delivers. It's the, you know, the ability to navigate, you know, all the news, and it's all the news, the nuances of the news, and deliver it into our homes in the evenings and on special broadcasts. It's just, you just don't get that often. And when you talk about Lloyd and, you know, and Peter, given the hero's exit, yeah, I mean, there was definitely a double standard put in place. And again, it comes down to that humanity. I mean, Lisa is, you know, an on-air anchor, but she's still a person, and a person that we've come to trust. We've let this person, you know, into our lives, and we expect better. And that's why I, you know, echo the sentiment that I'm hearing on social, which is, this is not right. This is not how you do things. And then to see the response that, you know, the company has had, or the lack of response, or their version of a response, is just confounds me as to why it is happening this way. And, you know, as a communicator, this is a brand and reputation crisis.
So, talking about the reputation crisis and the BellMedia's response, there's some very smart people at BellMedia and their public relations department that should have been able to identify that this was going to be a potential problem, and how they communicated that to the C-suite, who then made the final decision to go ahead with this type of firing, confounds me and as you point out, a lot of people. What should they have done? How should they have approached this?
Well, you hire a comms team because they are professional. They talk to people, they monitor different sort of, you know, communications channels. They're the ones who have the finger on the pulse of what people are saying, how people are acting, both internally and externally. And those are the people you've obviously hired. They are the professionals, and you should be listening to them and having them at the table, bringing them into, you know, the decision-making process, because they're going to give you good guidance. That's what communicators are trained to do. And, you know, not listening to that guidance, you know, it can be fraught with peril. And we've seen, you know, in the last 2 weeks, we have seen a delayed response. And then when all of us, because it's public, we start to see, you know, what the response is, which was more of a corporate speak rather than an actual authentic response, where you didn't need to, you know, have a deep examination of what was going on. You could just go to any social feed. You could pick up, you know, sort of the articles and the coverage in your competitors to see what was, you know, what was being said, that there was this outrage. So why delay? You know, classic, you know, sort of crisis training will tell you, respond immediately. You know, you may not know all the answers, but still acknowledge that you hear people. But then to come out with a response that is pretty much a non-response, and actually went far in, you know, my interpretation of blaming Lisa for not sticking with the plan, which was to announce her departure. Like, she has to announce her own firing on the 11 o'clock news. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Then to have an internal town hall where questions aren't actually answered authentically, and other sources, and I'm picking up all of this maybe as other, you know, sort of viewers of your podcast and yourself, Marcel, are following, you know, the media accounts both on social and in traditional media. You know, we're reading all this, and then that's cut short, and then you start to hear what else is going on in the whole sort of listing of other people who have been treated badly and shabbily by the company. And so you just kind of look at that and you go, okay, so now we're in a vacuum of any response. You're starting to have other people come forward with their shared experience, or people are starting to look at other things. And this is where we start to get the other comments about, decisions around who made the decision to let, Lisa's hair go gray. Well, now you've magnified this and you've amplified this conversation. And so at each step, the company, Bell had this opportunity to work with its professionals. And I'm not sure why they didn't listen. To think that this would be go away. And we can all admit that, outrage on social does have a bit of a shelf life. But this is 2 weeks now. Even today, before I joined you, Marcel, it's trending again. And you also have marketers coming on board, as you mentioned, Dove, Sports Illustrated, Wendy's. And it's just continuing to add to, sort of this, to the problem at hand. And, you hire communicators because they are professional. They're going to give you the good guidance. And if you don't listen to that, as I said, it's fraught with peril. And at any time, this story needed, and this situation needed clarity. It needed authenticity. It needed, genuine humanity in terms of how we address and work with people, both, internally, the journalists that work there and the production crew and other employees, as well as the Canadian public.
So, it's interesting. You raise a lot of good points. But for me, I'm looking at it and I see there's an element of ageism and sexism, involved in here. Think about, again, we talked about Peter Mansbridge and Lloyd Robertson. Generally men, myself included, I have a receding hairline and I'm getting up there in age. Sometimes referred to as silver foxes or have great experience and things like that. And yet a woman of the same caliber, is kind of pushed aside, make room for somebody younger to come up the ranks. And so you don't see the same number of women in senior positions, whether they're at banks or in major companies, who have a wealth of experience and are not given their due. They're kind of shown the door and say, well, it's time for you to exit gracefully and go off into retirement. But men, in their 70s, 80s and older are brought onto boards of companies, are brought onto different areas, and are celebrated for their past accomplishments and for their experience. And so I see this huge double standard that's out there that, really what I think this does is shine a light on it.
It does. I mean, this has raised the conversation. And, changing a logo, I'm a big fan of Wendy's, favorite burger joint. And I love what they did because it raises awareness. It elevates the conversation. Yet I have to ask, when does real meaningful change happen? What does that look like? And I have to...
So what does it look like?
Well, this is the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, you're right. It is a double standard. We are, I'm bombarded every single day if I watch the news about, sort of from ads that tell me to fight the signs of aging. It's like, okay, right? I'm reminded. And the thing about, somebody, of Lisa's caliber letting their hair go gray, amazing. It was a common shared experience during the pandemic with salons being closed, right? It was an acknowledgement that, there are greater things in the world to worry about than the color of someone's hair. And then, but to assume that, gray hair is equated to age, and is equated to, see, sort of on your way out, it is wrong. And there is a huge double standard. And how does that change? Well, it changes first with conversation. It changes with, companies really walking the walk and talking the talk. If I look at sort of, when I started to examine, sort of what was going on, I started to do a deep dive into some of, sort of, Bell's, board of directors, right? And there's, they've got some high quality people there who've done a lot in the space of, for women. And I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a CSR and ESG sort of approach to this. Maybe there's a way that, conversations can take place of shared experiences. Now, I'm, from the media accounts, I understand that, sort of Bell is going to do an internal review. And I'm like, all right, but what are the goals? What are the mandates? Is it just, a stunt? Or is it going to lead to meaningful change? Is it going to raise that dialogue? Because as much as it's nice to have these companies, really talk about it, and I applaud them for it. And I got a good chuckle out of Wendy's. And obviously, the Dove campaign is, in keeping with their overall sort of women's empowerment, as it comes and speaks to beauty and well-being. And, Sports Illustrated, I mean, it's a big discussion. Ageism is something that, is not too far, out there for a lot of women. It's something that we think about. And I really want change to happen. And the only way that I can kind of wrestle with some of that is shop with my wallet, send my letters, do my public sort of, outreach to say, hey, this isn't right, whether that be through letters or social, but to take it off the pages of social and really take action. Shop with my wallet, send my letter in, as I said. I'm very fortunate to have a daughter who is now getting into the world and is, I have a privileged position as an educator to help get that next generation of people who are going to go into the workforce aware, to ask the questions. And, as a communicator, to demand to be at the table, to say, hey, we see things. This is how things are going to play out. Listen to us. Help us to help you navigate, the path forward.
So the last few minutes that we have, it's not been a great couple of weeks or months for communications companies. Obviously, we're focused on BellMedia, but Rogers had a similar problem, not related to an issue with an employee, but they had that massive blackout of their system, and they were not very swift and sure-footed in their response. So here are two of Canada's leading communications companies who can't communicate. I'm astounded that this was able to happen, and I'm sure it's going to make a great case study for somebody maybe at Humber or at one of the universities in the coming months.
Yeah, the Rogers outage delay. I mean, something's going on. It's not like people are, isolated. They're connected. They're going to find things out. And by not responding quickly creates a vacuum where a lot of different things can be said, done, and explored in that short period of time.
You need to be out there ahead of what's happening so that people know where things are and what your response is to the situation. Not just hole up in your towers and say that we're trying to figure it out.
And believe your own PR, your own hubris, right? There's something to be said about communicate quickly and then communicate authentically. You're dealing with real people who have entrusted and have a relationship, even if it's, not the best, but there is a degree of trust and understanding, that you're working with these companies and you expect the courtesy of a response, even if you don't like the response, it doesn't negate the fact that you were responded to, I guess,
Mm-hmm. And we haven't really seen much of that side of things. Look, there were literally tens of thousands of businesses that were impacted, small businesses who couldn't make sales because of it, who lost revenue. I'm sure that there's going to be any number of lawsuits and class action against Rogers over this fiasco of the outage. I know that Parliament has looked into it, that CRTC, etc. But and Rogers bills itself as the most reliable network in the country. I think that tagline might disappear over the next little while.
Well, careful what you say, right? Because, you just have to peel things off a little bit and you might find that's not really, true. But I will say I've started to see, and I'm a big consumer of traditional media as well. I've started to see the ads. I also have seen the print ads. Rogers is coming out with something. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in the days ahead with Bell. But I don't think this is the last we've heard of this. This conversation is going to continue. There is a need for real accountability. And I think, that will start with, authentic, I should say, also authentic accountability and really coming, clean with what happened, where things went off the rails. Admitting a mistake is part of that. Just saying you're sorry isn't enough. That sorry has to come with accountability. Meanwhile, again, gutted that this happened to Lisa. It's opened up an entirely huge conversation. There's still a lot of things that are not working, and we need to continue to fight for that equality and fight to get rid of that double standard.
On that note, Annette, I'd love to have you back, and we'll follow this story a little bit later and see what comes out of it. Really a pleasure having you on the podcast today. Annette Borgers is a professor at Humber College who teaches in the public relations graduate program in the Faculty of Media and Creative Arts. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Marcel.
Joining me today is Ron Faucheux. He is a nonpartisan political analyst. He's also the former publisher of Campaigns and Elections magazine and currently has a newsletter called Lunchtime Politics that tracks what's happening in American politics, and you can sign up for that at lunchtimepolitics.com. Ron is currently in New Orleans in Louisiana, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Marcel. I'm happy to be here and to talk to your audience, and I'm happy to see you again. It's been a while.
It has been. Ron, we can't go by a week without a major development in U.S. politics. We had just recently a number of primaries. Let me ask you off the top, what your thoughts? Were there any surprises that took place during those primaries?
Well, when you go through them, you find that, generally speaking, the polls were pretty well showed where they were going, at least roughly. They weren't always, individual polls weren't always accurate, but when you looked at all of the polling and the trends, it was generally accurate, so there weren't a lot of big surprises. The thing that everybody was looking at was Donald Trump and his influence on Republican primaries. And there were a number of cases where his candidates did not win, but there were more cases where his candidates did win. And the problem for Republicans now is the candidates that Trump pushed and got nominated are now not doing particularly well in the general election. And
so that's interesting. Sorry.
Yeah,
That's interesting because I saw that some Democrats were doing crossovers to vote for some of these, extreme Republicans. And so as a result, they felt that their chances in the general election would be better against some of these Trump extreme candidates. Is that
right.
what you're seeing?
Yes, that has happened. But what the big thing that's happening is while Trump is very popular among Republican voters, he's very unpopular among Democrats, of course, and among independent voters. So even though he might have enough strength to help push a Republican to run first in the plurality race, that Republican may not be strong enough to win in the general election. And without his involvement, the Republicans may have had a better chance to nominate a stronger candidate. So you've got U.S. Senate races, particularly in places like
Pennsylvania,
Georgia right now, Pennsylvania, two perfect examples. You also have Wisconsin is another example, and Arizona is another example. And that's just, right off the top of our heads, you can find a few more, too, where the Trump candidates are weaker than what they need to be and what the Republicans need to be. So while Donald Trump gets credit for nominating a lot of candidates he likes, he may also ultimately have to take the blame for screwing up the elections for Republicans because he helped nominate weaker candidates than were necessarily required. And in recent weeks in particular, the Republican advantage in the U.S. Senate, which is now 50-50, couldn't be any closer than it is. So all the Republicans need to do is to have a net gain of one seat, and they can take control of the U.S. Senate. But what's happening is the Republicans have a number of open seats. They thought they could elect Republicans to those seats. But the polling is showing, and Pennsylvania is a great example of that, where you have an open seat that's now held by a Republican, and you've got a Democrat leading the race by double digits. So the movement is not so much toward Democrats. Look, right now in American politics, majorities of voters don't like Trump, they don't like Biden, they don't like what the Democratic Congress is doing, and they don't like what Republicans in Congress are doing. So it's a sea of negativity here. It's not like, when one side goes down, the other side's going up because people like them. What we're having is a comparison between negatives. And Biden has improved his job ratings. Our average a few weeks ago showed him down to 37%. The average most recently is now in the lower 40s, around 42 or 43%, which is a nice improvement for a president, but it's still pretty low. A majority of voters are still giving the president negative ratings. And when a president of the United States has net negative ratings, it's very difficult for his party to be able to use his endorsement effectively. When you look at the abortion issue in national politics, it's very complex. It's not as simple as saying, well, some people are for it, some people are against it. In fact, most people in the United States fall somewhere in between. On the one hand, they may support a woman's right to choose up until a point, but then they support abortion restrictions thereafter. And where those restrictions start and stop is where the fight is being held. So some states say, well, you can have an abortion the first 15 weeks. Some say the first 6 weeks. Some say you can never have an abortion. And some say you can have an abortion at any point. So that's oftentimes where the battle is. So it's not always clear to be able to say, well, the pro-abortion rights people, the anti-abortion people are doing particularly well. But what's happening now is a lot of components of the Democratic Party's coalition, particularly women, pro-choice women, were not particularly enthused over where things were going in Congress and what President Biden was doing. And it wasn't just for abortion, it was for a whole lot of reasons, mostly economic, frankly. But then when the abortion issue became important, then all of a sudden that changed to the extent that it put that issue among all the other issues above something like inflation in the economy, particularly for Democrats, who were increasingly saying they were worried about economic and inflation issues. So to make a long story short, what it means is that it is revved up, it's charged. The hardcore base of the Democratic Party among voters who are pro-choice, that's mostly women, although there are men in that too. And so the Democrats, I think, have been effective in using Justice Clarence Thomas's language in the abortion decision, where he said, well, now that abortion's over, we're going to go after other things. And it created a sense, well, are they going after birth control? Are they going after same-sex marriage? Where does this stop? And so it's really charged up the liberal base of the Democratic Party. And in a state like Kansas that you brought up, where the pro-abortion rights people won, Kansas is a very conservative state. So if the if the abortion rights side can win in Kansas, then that sends a signal that they can be pretty effective in a lot of states in the country. So yes, that has helped the Democrats. Now, whether that issue holds up over time, whether the fury on that issue holds up over time, we don't really know yet. But as it stands now, it has helped. But Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell, I think, put his finger on it when he said voters were looking at quality of candidates. And what he was implying there is that Trump has saddled the Republicans with a lot of candidates who are not particularly popular for these jobs they're running for. And so that continues to hurt the Republican side. But we can't forget the fundamentals in the race haven't changed. That voters in the United States are very dissatisfied with where things are. They're dissatisfied with the economy. They're dissatisfied with border policies, with crime policies, and a whole slew of some other issues. And usually when you've got that kind of public dissatisfaction, the ends, and the Democrats are the ends. They control Congress, they control the White House. The ends usually suffer. So the fundamentals still favor the Republicans, but tactically, the Republicans have been losing ground.
So picking up on your comments about the issues that are driving voters, the economy, the president scored a major victory when he was able to get his proposals through Congress. Obviously by the skin of his teeth, and after much watering down of the initial proposals, but that seems to be placating some voters, that action is being taken on inflation. We're seeing gas prices starting to come down. We're seeing some other prices starting to come down. There's a feeling, according to economists, that they may be able to get through to a soft landing, not necessarily before November, but it seems that the indicators are going in the right direction, shall we say. And if that's the case, then Democrats can run on the economy. And just this week, the president is signing a bill that's going to cancel, I think, $10,000 of student debt for thousands or tens of thousands of Americans who still have student debt, which is, from all accounts, to be a very positive and popular proposal. So, they have two major things that are out there. There's still a lot of time. The starting gun for November really doesn't go off until after Labor Day, but in this early period, the president and the Democrats seem to at least be heading in a more positive direction.
Yeah, that's right. And, the thing to keep in mind is Joe Biden got 51% of the popular vote when he ran for president, and Trump had 47%. But even though Biden had 51% support in the election, when his job rating goes down to 37%, as it did, that means that 14% gap, where people who voted for Joe Biden, or for Joe Biden, were anti-Donald Trump, didn't want to vote for Republicans, but then they left Joe Biden. They left the Democrats. And a lot of the people who voted for Biden left him because they didn't think he was effectual. They didn't think he was competent. They didn't think he was getting things done. And they didn't think the Democrats in Congress were getting things done. So what's happening now is that with the passage of the legislation that you mentioned, it's making Democrats feel like, well, maybe our side is effectual. Maybe we are getting a lot of things done. We passed a gun restriction bill. We've done legislation now on climate change and health care and all the other things that you talked about. So that's really what it's doing. It's bringing back Democrats into the fold.
But when we look at the matchup between Biden versus Trump, Biden still is coming out ahead. It seems that the Trump side is only appealing to their base and not reaching out into independents, because in terms of independents, Biden still seems to be picking up the majority of independents.
Well, some of the polls have shown Trump a little bit ahead. Some show Biden a little bit ahead. And I think the bottom line is that it would be close. And it's close because most Americans don't want either one to be president.
So let me ask you this. Sorry, Ron, but let me ask you, if it's not going to be Trump, is it going to be DeSantis or is it going to be somebody else? Because we're talking about the Republicans and assuming that Trump's going to be the nominee, but he may not be.
Well, those are all fascinating questions. Number one, we're not sure Trump will be the nominee for a couple of reasons. Number one, Donald Trump may decide he doesn't think he can win in November. So he might stay out of the race. Number two, he has big legal problems right now. And even though he has been able to avoid them in the past, at any point, the guillotine may come down on him in terms of criminal charges or whatever. And that could make it much more difficult for him to run. A lot of Republicans, before this most recent controversy involving the search of his house and his office, a lot of Republicans were moving towards saying, well, we like Donald Trump, we like his policies, but maybe a new messenger would carry the message better. And so, excuse me, so Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was doing increasingly well in polls against Trump. So it doesn't mean that Trump will be the nominee, but we don't know whether he runs or not and under what circumstances.
And that also goes for Joe Biden, is whether he will seek a second term. There's speculation that he may decide, that because of his age and what have you, that he's going to hand over the baton to someone else, like Kamala Harris or another person could be the Democrat. So we could see a completely different lineup in the next presidential cycle.
A lot of Democrats did not want President Biden to run again. They are afraid of his advanced age. If he wins and serves out his full second term, he would be 86 years old at the end of that term. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Democrats are concerned about his electability to run again. And that may ultimately cause him not to run. We don't know that yet. He now says he wants to run, and that's sort of where he is. But he may not run, and there'll be other people getting in the race if that's the case. I doubt whether there would be a major challenge to Biden if he does run. we're going to have to look for somebody else. And I'm not so sure the vice president would necessarily be the natural heir. A lot of Democrats have been unhappy with her performance in office and would look to look to other possibilities.
No, I fully agree with that. Now, aside from what's happening in Congress, there's a number of gubernatorial races and state house races that are going to be taking place. There's the one in Texas where Beto O'Rourke is running, and from what I gather, he's still 6 or 7 points or more behind the incumbent. And then there's the New York gubernatorial race there, and a few others. Are there any surprises or anything that we should be keeping an eye out in this November election?
Well, generally speaking, the incumbents who are running are generally ahead. That doesn't mean they'll win in the end, but most of them are ahead now. When you look at some of the big states, you mentioned New York. I mean, ultimately, the incumbent Democratic governor will win that. The Governor Hochul, the Republican candidate, may be able to narrow the margin a little bit, but the Democrats should win. The Democrats right now look like they're winning Pennsylvania, which is a state they now have, and many people thought they could lose. California, it's a Democratic incumbent. He should win easily. Michigan has a Democratic governor, and who's running ahead in the polls, but it is a race, and it is being contested. So that is one race to look at that might be interesting. You have a few other places around the country, like Wisconsin and Arizona, that bear watching, and maybe a couple of other races. But generally speaking, the focus of interest will be on the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate.
Okay. Ron, it's unfortunate that we've run out of time, but I really want to thank you for sharing your insights. Ron Faucheux is a nonpartisan political analyst, a former publisher of Campaigns and Elections, and currently has a newsletter called Lunchtime Politics, which you can subscribe at lunchtimepolitics.com. Ron, thanks for having you. I hope we'll have an opportunity to chat about what's happening in the next little while.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You opened up the show by talking about a lot of things have changed and there's been a lot of movement. And I think my best prediction is keep watching, because there'll be a lot more changes and a lot more movement.
Well, we'll love to have you back again and share on some of those things that we're supposed to be watching on. Thanks so much, Ron.